As Inktober looms ever closer, I thought it might be beneficial to go over my materials. The things in general that I use for this month-long challenge each year. Obviously, over the course of time, I've used many different things, but I thought it would be beneficial to just go over the stuff that I am currently using, used last year, or am planning on using this year. There is, of course, no end to the supplies that you could use. You could use a pen or ink of any kind. In fact, you could do it digitally if you would like. So I am not saying that these are the things you should use or are the best things to use. I'm simply saying these are the things that I use. And I'm going to start off with papers and sketchbooks, and then I'm going to go into pens and ink. Then if we need to, we'll do a follow-up video later and go over additional things. So the first thing I want to talk about is this sketchbook right here. This is a Bristol sketchbook. It is 10 by 10 inches, and I rather enjoy the square format. It's not necessary, obviously, but I find it rather enjoyable mostly because my sketchbooks over the years have always looked like this. And so having something that is just a little bit different is a little bit more exciting for me. This sketchbook has been one that I have enjoyed using for the last, I guess, year and a half. I used it with a lot of my Inktober drawings last year, a lot of Smogist drawings and things like that. And in fact, this is one of my drawings from Inktober last year. This sketchbook has been a lot of fun to work with, and it's been really, really reliable. I find that for Inktober in general, I like Bristol paper. I like smooth papers and paper that is absorbent enough that my inks dry quickly, but also don't dry immediately. This sketchbook has been reliable, and although I am very close to finishing it, I still have lots of sketches like this that need to be touched up. And of course, you can see my robots appearing wherever I am. This sketchbook is one that I plan on finishing out in the next couple days. I will actually be moving on to a new one that is basically an exact copy of this, getting a couple cute stickers on it, and then moving forward. The next sketchbook I want to talk about is this guy. And this is basically just a regular traditional sketchbook for putting ink drawings into. In a lot of ways, this is the sketchbook that I use for my preparation. These are drawings that I made in search of different strategies to try to teach texturing techniques when it comes to ink. I do a lot of that kind of work in this sketchbook. But I have used this sketchbook in the past for ink drawings in their entirety, and it could be used for something like Inktober. I've used a sketchbook like this in the past for Inktober as well. And you can see some of these drawings that have shown up in instructional videos or sketchbook sessions or podcasts are located in this sketchbook. The paper here does tend to take a few minutes longer to dry, so I end up smudging a little bit more frequently than I would like, but this kind of paper works really, really well. I can go back to the cover here so you can see exactly what this is. This is a quite affordable sketchbook. It is acid-free paper, 9 by 12 inches, 70 pound, but it's a smooth surface. Again, that is the big thing I'm looking for when it comes to working with ink. There are a lot of other sketchbooks you could use. You can use any regular drawing sketchbook. For years, that's what I did. But because I rather look forward to this and enjoy this each year now, I try to make sure I have a sketchbook dedicated just to ink to work on that. However, I don't just work with ink. Sometimes when I'm working on Inktober or things that are adjacent to it, I like to use watercolor as well. And in that vein, it behooves me to have either a mixed media sketchbook or a watercolor sketchbook specifically. This little sketchbook I have worked on in the past, and I've done mostly birds in here. And these birds are always made with a mix of watercolor, gouache, and ink. In fact, I generally make the sketch of these with ink first, and then watercolor it in. I show these not because I plan on using them this year, but because this is something I've used frequently, and if you're looking for a slightly different take on Inktober, I would encourage you to think about using something like watercolors and ink together. This is a pretty standard sketchbook. I don't have any details on it, I just know that it's watercolor paper. This, however, is really high quality watercolor paper. It is hot pressed, which means that it is smooth paper, and it means that when you go watercolor or ink of any kind on top of it, it tends to not be disturbed by the texture of the paper. In here, I only have a couple drawings so far. I'm reserving this for doing some large-scale pieces, but this paper is lovely and acts very, very similarly to a lot of the ink paper specifically. So if you had a couple extra dollars to spend, this is wonderful paper and can be used to do all kinds of things with ink when you plan on layering particularly thick layers of watercolor on top. But that kind of covers the basics of paper. So let's take a look at the pens, the actual implements that are going to allow me to do what I want to do with Inktober. This is my basic travel ink set. This is the one I keep in my backpack pretty much all the time. It doesn't have a lot, but what it has takes care of pretty much all my needs. As you can see, these are mostly microns. This guy is the one kind of odd factor out, and though this mechanical pencil is there, I almost never use it because I vastly prefer the red. So the first thing to talk about, I suppose, is this guy right here. This is a Prismacolor Kohl Erase red pencil. It is erasable. I always do under sketches on these kinds of drawings, especially with Inktober, because I want it to be fairly precise. I want to make sure I'm accomplishing what I want to, and there's no shame in sketching underneath. This is a really valuable tool, as is this guy, which is a Prismacolor eraser. You do not need an eraser that is brand aligned with your pencils. However, this is just a good one, and I happen to have it lying around. I've got many erasers that have accumulated over time. It doesn't matter as long as it doesn't leave residue on your paper. As for these guys, let's talk about the basic microns first. These are Pigma microns. This is a 005, which is the smallest one that I traditionally use. This is a 01, which I use for the vast majority of all my drawings. That is 0.25 millimeters. And this will pretty much take care of everything you need. If this is the only pen you had, you would be totally fine. The next size up here, well, actually, no, I just have a ton of the 01s, that's right. Over here, I have a 03, which is 0.35 millimeters. I don't use this as much, but sometimes when I have large fields that I need to shade in or hatch, I would rather use something like this. This is a 05, which is 0.45 millimeters. I use this for the largest marks that I'm going to make generally on a piece. This is large scale hatching or coloring in large areas that aren't quite so large as to need something bigger. This guy is a more recent addition to my tools. This is a Pigma brush pen. This took a long time for me to understand how to use and to use with any proficiency. So if you decide to take on something like this, just keep in mind that it did take me a long time. Hopefully it won't take you nearly as long, but it did take me quite a long time to master, and I wouldn't even say I've mastered it yet. This is another brush pen. This one has a slightly less thick tip. This is a Faber-Castell, which I believe is how you pronounce that. This is a pretty lovely pen. It's not quite as precise as the other. This one I use generally for just covering in large areas. This mechanical pencil is just a mechanical pencil that I accumulated at some point. This guy, however, is incredible because often I end up with really large areas in the background that need to be covered in, and this is just a massive pen tip for inking in those large areas. In the past, I have used a brush for doing this, but this is actually my preferred method for doing that. But those are my black inks. These are the ones that I use for probably 99% of what I'm doing, and they allow me to achieve much of what I'm doing. However, every once in a while I like to bring in color, and so I'm going to take a moment and show you the brush pens that I like to use for color here. And that would be these guys. These are my King Art twin tip brush pens. I have purchased, I believe, 2 or 3 sets of these, and I love them. They allow me to accomplish pretty much everything I want to with my brush pens. I keep them over on the side of my workbench, and I keep them in mason jars like this. So you can see I kind of arrange them by color and then put them over on the side. That way I can pull them out when I need. That is, of course, assuming that I actually stay organized, because most of the time they sit in this guy. And this is just a conglomeration of all of my brush pens that I use most of the time, especially when I'm out of the house. There are a couple in here that are of a different brand. This is Tombow, and I am not as impressed with these guys. So if you were going to pick up some brush pens, my recommendation at least would be to get these guys, these King Art twin tip. They're not super expensive. Their ink lasts for a tremendous amount of time, and the tip integrity stays intact for a really long amount of time. I have had several that have run out of ink or their tips have expired, but that's because I've done lots of pieces that are like 18 by 24 inches and used brush pens to do the entirety of the background. So my grays and my light blues, bless them, they have finally run dry. But that gives you an understanding of the basic supplies that I am going to be using this Inktober. And I would love to hear in the comments below which of these you've used before and which supplies you will be using, because it's always exciting to see what everybody else is up to. Obviously, you could use any kind of ink. You could do this digitally if you want to. I rather enjoy using traditional media, and this year I'm going to be sticking to these. Maybe in the future I will actually go into something a little bit more old school and work with one of these guys again, but not this round. So let me know in the comments below what you're planning on using for Inktober if you are planning on participating, and I hope this has been beneficial for you. All right, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.